As a 52-year-old white man, I'm here to tell you that, racism isn't actually very serious or very important. I know you think it is, but really it isn't. In the great scheme of things, it's not actually much of a big deal at all. There are racists out there, of course, but there are nowhere near as many as a statement like that conjures up. I don't know how many times I have to keep saying this, but the overwhelming majority of people in this country are not racist. And that means that as the white population is still very much in the majority, the overwhelming majority of white people are not racist. They're not racist in public, and neither are they racist in private, despite that being the explanation for the absence of visible racism. How do I know this? Well, I don't know it. I don't know it beyond the shadow of a doubt. I cannot with absolute certainty say that I am right. I'll concede that. But on the balance of probability, which is the closest we're going to get to certainty, I can be pretty sure that I'm right. So why do I think I'm even probably right? Because I talk to people, as you do, whoever you are. And I genuinely cannot remember the last time I heard somebody say something that was actually definitively racist. Actually, that's not true. I do remember. A workmate on a site once said something nasty. I don't remember precisely, but he said when a discussion happened to be about black people for some reason, described them as mud people or dirt people or something like that. Like I say, I don't recall the exact words, but it was something unfair, untrue and unkind. This was about 5 years ago, and to my shame I never challenged him about it. But the reason I never challenged him was because I was so shocked and so completely surprised that I wasn't even sure that I'd heard him right. Did he really say that? Surely not, I thought. But I think he did. But the reason that I was so surprised was because it had probably already been over 25 years since I had heard anything even approaching that. And just like when you get thumped by someone in the street and you don't retaliate, it's not because of cowardice. It's shock, mostly. Physical assault is so far out of the bounds of normal behaviour that people are prevented from responding in kind. And so it is with the expressions of overt racism. You just don't expect it. You don't expect it because people just don't say things like that anymore. It just doesn't happen. Now, I know what you're thinking. People don't say racist things, but they think them. And that has always been the accusation about racism in Britain, as opposed to, say, the US. Because of the First Amendment in the US, you're allowed to say nigger in the street. You might get your head kicked in, and probably deservedly so, but nobody can tell you you're not allowed to say it. But in Britain, since people don't say things like that, which is more a product of basic good manners rather than our ridiculous hate speech laws, the accusation is one of covert racism. British people, they say, don't say racist things purely because it is bad manners, as if that was a bad thing in itself, rather than because it is simply wrong to say racist things. This is the crux of the slogan that has been scrawled over countless scraps of cardboard since Black Lives Matter started attempting to segregate our society. The UK is not innocent, they say. Now, whether they're right or wrong is not the issue here. Black Lives Matter have managed to avoid all the considerable progress that has been made in race relations since those first Jamaicans stepped ashore off the Empire Windrush when it docked at Tilbury in 1948. And why do they say that? Is it because they really believe that black people are discriminated against now in exactly the same way and at the same magnitude as they were in 1948? Do they really believe that? Of course they don't. In the same way that there is no moral equivalence at all between Adolf Hitler and Winston Churchill. And they know it. They are merely saying that because they don't want us to feel good about anything in our society. I'm not saying that race relations, how old-fashioned that phrase seems, I'm not saying that race relations in the UK are vastly better than they are in the US, but they're different. We do some things better, and they do other things better. The real difference in racial strife is the gun issue in the US. This is not the time or the place to discuss the gun debate, but the fact is that the US is a very heavily armed society. Being a policeman in the US is infinitely more dangerous than it is over here. The laws of self-preservation dictate that, given the prevalence of firearms in the US, it is hardly surprising that American cops might just be a little trigger happy. Now, that doesn't explain the killing of George Floyd, but it is to do with the same thing. He was unarmed and handcuffed and the whole thing was filmed, but his killing seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back. Dealing with bigger, stronger, uncooperative and possibly armed suspects that might also be drunk or high on drugs is par for the course for the American police. Often they overreact. There are countless videos doing the rounds that bear witness to the police over as well as underreacting. Quite plainly, they overreacted in the case of George Floyd. Perhaps there are racist killings, but there is no proof as yet that this was one of them. And I hate to be too pedantic, but that happened in the United States. It didn't happen in the United Kingdom. But the UK is not innocent, Black Lives Matter continues to declare, just in case we might be tempted to think that there is a single thing that is good about our country. The UK had a slave trade, they say. The UK benefited financially from the slave trade, they say. And that's true. But every society, at some point in its history, if it's lasted long enough, has dealt in slaves. The significant difference is that the UK, once the decision was taken that it was immoral and that it should be abolished, was the one society that was prepared to have the courage of its convictions and set about doing what was necessary to bring it to an end. And there were ample financial sacrifices that were necessary to make that so. It is true that the UK is not innocent, but it's one of the least guilty. But like I say, they're not interested in the UK's guilt or its innocence. What they're interested in is demoralising the bulk of the population. And let's not beat around the bush here. They're interested in demoralising the white population, because the demoralised and guilt-dripped white population is easier to get concessions out of. Because Black Lives Matter isn't about evening up the playing field and settling racial injustice. It's not about equality. It is absolutely and definitively not about Black Lives Mattering or making them better, since the past 3 weeks will have made Black lives, in particular, immeasurably worse. It's about revenge. And when you're in the business of extracting revenge, since it is a dish best served cold, it requires cold hearts to get you what you want. And such is the nature of revenge, is that it must be satisfied. It must be satisfied no matter what the collateral damage to wider society. Sentimental concerns about interracial relationships and friendships must be sacrificed. They don't have time for that. The resentful have a score to settle. Black must be pitted against white. The black father must be separated from his mixed-race kid's white mother. White stepfathers must be wrenched away from their black stepsons so that they can be where Black Lives Matter think they ought to be, without a father, even a stepfather. Those that have the misfortune to share black and white genes will be sentenced to living a half-life in the shadows, prevented from breeding, either through shame, legislation, or forced medical intervention, lest they compound the reality of their original sin. This will be the brave new world of Black Lives Matter. But of course it's not completely true to say that no Black Lives Matter to Black Lives Matter. That would be unfair, because there are some black lives that do matter to them. And they are those black lives that hate the society that they live in. They matter. They matter to Black Lives Matter, as do the resentful and the envious and the spiteful and the criminal and the pathologically unsuccessful. They matter. The black lives that don't matter are the respectful and the dutiful and the helpful and the responsible and the socially minded and the law-abiding. The black lives that don't matter to Black Lives Matter are those who have happily assimilated, and by doing so have staked a proper claim and taken their place in society alongside their white and brown and yellow compatriots. They don't matter to Black Lives Matter. In fact, not only do they not matter, those are the people that will be the first to be denounced as collaborators in their new apartheid utopia, even if they have done nothing other than make a success of their lives, rather than wallowing in mean-spirited resentment. Because that resentment is the fuel that keeps this destructive and hateful show on the road. Resentment insists that the UK is a racist society, despite survey after countless survey, not only refuting that fact, but instead indicating that the UK is one of the least, if not the least racist society on earth. So the UK is racist, is it? Well, compared to what? Compared to the US, France, Germany, Hungary, China, Jamaica, South Africa? The UK, according to another recent survey that I could cite, but won't bother because the infantile Marxist students at Black Lives Matter won't listen anyway, is one of the best places to live in the world if you are black. But still this pernicious myth prevails despite any and all evidence. Why? Because it feels like it. Because it feels like it to someone who got stopped by the police once 12 years ago when they were doing nothing wrong. It feels like it. Just like when they had an interaction with a white person that didn't go the way they wanted, or even just remained unresolved. Because racism. Blah, blah, bloody blah. He's a racist. Is he? How do you know? Well, he doesn't say it, but I can tell. How can you tell? Well, he's not going to say he's a racist, is he? Be serious. But if somebody really was a racist, you know, really, then surely they wouldn't care if you thought they were. Because if they really are racist, then they wouldn't care what you, a black person, really thought about them. The reason people don't want to be thought of as racists is because they value, to a lesser or greater degree, the opinion, not just of other white people, but of black people too. A true racist doesn't care about such things. So the fact that the majority, the overwhelming majority of white people don't say racist things is because they're not racist. It's not because they're hiding it. So why is it that so many people, both black and white, from Black Lives Matter, continue to insist that there is racism absolutely everywhere one cares to look? Despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary, there are enough little hangovers from our imperial past to amplify and give credence to the lie that the UK is a racist society. Edward Colston did make a fair chunk of his money, it seems, from the slave trade, when it was both legal and, as unbelievable as it now sounds, respectable. Then, a considerable time later, either he or his descendants commissioned a statue to commemorate not the profits he made from selling live human beings into brutal slavery, but the good philanthropic works that he did for his home city of Bristol. I think it's fair to say that Colston was, at the very least, a controversial figure, a figure that none of us would celebrate today. Judged on its own, there is a valid argument for having his statue removed, judging it purely on its own. But the mob justice that his statue received, when it was torn down and dumped in the Severn, made many of us nervous about the precedent it set. And we were not wrong. Almost immediately, the white-hating, virtue-signalling, race-baiting little emperor of City Hall, Mayor Sadiq Khan, wasted absolutely no time in having the statue of another slave trader, Robert Milligan, removed by personal edict. Again, what's the problem, you may say? Who wants to honour a slave trader? Again, a fair point. But the fact is that a statue that had been there for probably close to 200 years was removed on a whim by the mayor. There was no vote, no discussion and no debate in the London Assembly, where the mayor is supposed to be called to account. But we knew it wouldn't stop there. Whole slews of British comedy shows were next on the chopping block, including perhaps the greatest of them all, Fawlty Towers. Gone with the Wind, that masterpiece of American cinema, set during the American Civil War, was deemed problematic because of the portrayal of a black woman in servitude, and the actress who played her was the first black person to receive an Oscar. But we don't like it. Our 2020 I don't like it, so we are going to have to erase it from our memory. And once we have, are we going to erase the memory of slavery too? Are we going to pretend that didn't happen? I mean, maybe this all might be an extremely clever ploy to make everyone feel a bit better about being American or British by pretending that slavery never happened. Is that a good thing to do? I suppose after 2 or 3 generations, and once all evidence in the form of books, TV and films has been incinerated and faded from living memory, maybe we can start again at year 0 without any history at all. But how on earth are we supposed to do without Churchill? And how are the Americans supposed to do without George Washington? He is the founding father of the United States. And in almost 1,000 years of the continuous undefeated history of England at least, the period in which Churchill was in charge was our best. It is the period that we all measure ourselves against. Without Churchill, and the stories, and sometimes myths around the Second World War, are what actually make us British. Why must we live without them? Because a few black people and their self-hating white Confederates don't like it? But these people are the real, genuine racists. They look at Winston Churchill and they see a white man, a man that doesn't look like them. And so they reason that Churchill is biologically nothing to do with them. So they can't feel pride in a man that has nothing biologically to do with them. But I've got news for you. Churchill has almost got nothing biologically to do with me. Unless there is some branch in my family tree that I'm not aware of. But I revere Churchill because he was a part of a culture that begat me. But who's to say that just because your grandparents weren't actually here when Churchill was in power, you're not also a part of that culture? And how long do you have to be present in a culture before you're a part of it? 3 generations or 3 minutes? We, as British people, or white British people if you insist, believe ourselves to be generous and welcoming. Now, maybe that's just a conceit. Maybe that's just something we tell ourselves to make us feel better. Maybe that's us glossing over slavery and the Empire and the riots in Notting Hill and Toxteth and Broadwater Down and Brixton and the Stephen Lawrence murder and the Windrush scandal and Grenfell Tower. Maybe it is, and maybe we are guilty. I'm not saying we are, but just for argument's sake, let's say that we are. Let's say that we are guilty of being racist and of prioritising the welfare of the indigenous white population over that of our black and brown newcomers. Let's say that's true. Let's say that is our original sin, that we've taken care of our own. But is there anybody else here that shares some of the guilt? Or is it all us? Can you think of anybody else that might share at least some of the responsibility? The so-called Windrush generation came here, mostly in the 50s, because they were encouraged to. There was supposedly a labour shortage in Britain after the war that needed filling. So they were invited. They were invited to do all those jobs. You could say, and I'm sure that this is true for some people, that they came to help the mother country. As loyal British subjects, they selflessly came to get the old girl back on her feet after the war. But that won't have been the reason that the majority came here. Why do you think the majority of people came here? They came here for a completely reasonable, but nevertheless self-serving reason. They came here to make a better life for themselves. They came here to accrue the benefits of living in a modern industrial society, a society that they didn't have at home in Jamaica, in Trinidad, or in British Guyana. They came here for totally understandable, but normally selfish human reasons. They had an opportunity, and they took it. But as with every opportunity, there are some costs to be factored in. And one of these costs is that by moving societies, by moving countries, you are placing yourself into a potentially weaker situation. You leave your support network of family, friends and community. You leave them behind, and by doing so, you become reliant to a certain degree on the kindness of strangers. That's a decision that the Windrush generation made. Sure, they were invited by the British state and they were encouraged to come, but nobody forced them to. They weren't marched down to the docks in Kingston or Port of Spain at gunpoint to be transported back to Britain, even as indentured labour. That was their choice. That was the choice that your parents and your grandparents made. It was a choice made in good faith, and I'm sure in some cases on incorrect assumptions. But it was theirs, and their decision to move away from their roots had consequences. It meant that they had decided to live amongst people who were, visibly at least, unlike them. It also meant that they were making the decision to be a minority, a visible minority. Now, maybe they thought about that deeply enough, but maybe they didn't. Maybe they thought that being in a minority was no big deal. But whether they thought it was reason enough not to come to Britain, or to come anyway, that was a decision that they made. And you didn't. They made that decision for you. They made the decision to put their children into the weaker position of being in a minority. So you can blame white people for your predicament if you like, but they never forced your parents and your grandparents to come, although I reckon that they've been pretty welcoming on the whole, all things considered. But if you want to blame somebody for having the misfortune to live in the racist hellhole that is the United Kingdom, maybe you should blame your parents. Now, contrast that with the experience of black people in the United States. Their ancestors were taken and put on ships at the point of a gun or a sword and placed in chains from the coast of West Africa all the way to North America, and were kept shackled for the next 150 years or so. They had no choice about going to America. It wasn't up to them. It was the fault of America that there were black people in America. If you can call it a fault, which I don't. White America hasn't got a leg to stand on about the validity of black people being in America, and America is having to deal with that. I think it was dealing with it in its own ponderous and sluggish way, at least up until about 3 weeks ago. And I know the UK is not innocent. I know. America was a British colony when the slave trade started, and Britain benefited enormously from it. I know this, and so does everybody else. Nobody is denying it. But to equate the injustices that were done to the Windrush generation, who black people are mostly descended from in the UK, with the unparalleled horror of centuries of slavery, is not only idiotic, but is in fact an insult to those that were enslaved. To put it crudely, bluntly, and not especially accurately, racism is bad, but slavery is of a different magnitude altogether. To declare that the UK is not innocent is a statement of fact as far as it goes. But is it so guilty that everything that underpins it, including its history, its culture, its literature, its cinema, its music, must be destroyed? Must it? And to be replaced with what? Go on, please tell me. When all of our history has been erased, with all its triumphs and disasters, all its virtues and all its sins, what are you going to replace it with? What is it that will be acceptable to you? Please tell me so that I can make an informed choice as to whether I think it's worth accommodating your whims, or whether it's worth me deciding that you are in fact my implacable enemy, and then I can do nothing other than tell you to go and fuck yourself. Because it looks like those are the two choices open to me. Either we accept all blame and all the responsibility for the sins of our fathers and our grandfathers, and by way of recompense we hand over all that we have and take a knee, or what? We can't have a conversation? Like that woman who wrote that stupid book, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. Or we can't be friends? Because friends do all sorts of things for each other. Some friends are so close they're even prepared to take a bullet for each other. But if you have a friend that insists that you take a knee, well, you're not friends. So, are we friends? Or aren't we?